Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show for Thursday, April the 22nd, 2021. Just a reminder that in approximately 90 minutes, I will be talking about our Theater Thursday movie, which is called Parasite from Korea. I thought I would start off today by talking about Generation Z or Gen Z or the Zoomers or Generation Conzoomer, as I'm going to call them. Who are these people? They were born in the 1990s, in the mid to late 90s, and the oldest of them are now heading out into the adult world. And it doesn't look very inviting, does it? We had the economic crash in 2007, 2008, and we've had the COVID hysteria for a year. But let's see what CNBC has to say. This is from November of last year. Gen Z incomes predicted to beat millennials in 10 years and be most disruptive generation ever. That's from the Bank of America. Hayam Israel, global head of thematic investment strategy at B of A Global Research, said the Gen Z revolution is starting as the first generation born into an online world is now entering the workforce and compelling other generations to adapt to them, not vice versa. Not bloody likely. But nevertheless, this means that Gen Z, considered by the U.S. Investment Bank to be those born between 1996 and 2016, was about to become the most disruptive to economies, markets, and social systems. With what power, I wonder? With what wealth? Lauma Tiemens-Kalns, a strategist at the bank, explained that the defining influential events that bookmark this generation are 9/11 and COVID. Yeah, those are the kind of bookends that you'd want, right? So those between those words would not remember the former, but would certainly remember the latter. B of A said Gen Z's economic power was fastest growing across all generational cohorts. Yeah, I suppose it might be the fastest growing because these people don't have much to start with, but never mind that. This generation's income is expected to increase fivefold by 2030 to $33 trillion as they enter the workplace, accounting for over a quarter of global income and then surpassing millennials' income by 2031. The great wealth transfer from older cohorts will add to Gen Z's consumer power, the report said, with baby boomers and the silent generation in the U.S. alone currently sitting on $78 trillion of wealth. The planted axiom here is that things are going to go on the way that they did, before 2007, 2008, before COVID. They're just going to they're going to step in the line and then move up. Even as, universities have been shut down for a year. When it turns out that we have this overproduction of elites and the cows are coming home as far as that one goes. Here's something from Visual Capitalist charting the growing generational wealth gap. Millennials are starting to accumulate wealth. Unfortunately for them, the amount and rate of accumulation is significantly behind older generations. Millennials are anticipated to inherit over $68 trillion from baby boomer parents by 2030. That's based on the assumption that the baby boomers are not going to sell it all before they die. So that siren's pretty close. When baby boomers were under 40, they held 13% of household wealth compared to just 5.9% for millennials under 40 in 2020. Who are Gen Z's parents? Why, that would be the millennials. So they don't have that much to pass on, do they? This is from Forbes from 2018. How much financial influence does Gen Z have? Each new generation of the market brings its own set of attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors, which can sometimes make them feel mysterious or elusive to marketers. While new to the scene, Gen Z does not fit this bill. Rather, they are resolute, smart, pragmatic, and hardworking, among other characteristics. It's the result of growing up in an environment shaped by economic instability and social change, not to mention rapid digital innovation. Again, there's another planted axiom here that a generation which grew up like this, looking at their phones, that somehow that this is a tremendous attribute. The Forbes story continues. This is not to say that reaching Gen Z won't be as demanding, if not more so than reaching millennials, but it does point to an enlightening and rewarding time in the market as they venture onward to change the world. And change the world they will. Gen Z is already on track to become the largest generation of consumers by the year 2020. Go consumers! And they account for 29 to 143 billion in direct spending. But their impact on the market doesn't stop there. 93% of parents today say their children influence family and household purchases, according to a report by Cassandra, meaning a significant portion of overall market spend is because of these youths. You see in all these stories that I've read, well, how about this upcoming generation, Gen Z? How are they important? Well, what can we sell to them? And what is it that is being sold to them? Well, here's a story, from yesterday, from Fast Company. Nike and Chick-fil-A are winning the hearts of American teens. Instagram is losing them. Snapchat is king. Beyond Meat is tasty. A new report from Piper Sandler offers insight into the hearts, minds, and most importantly, wallets of Generation Z. So running shoes and fast food chicken. It's not very ambitious, is it? Connie Lynn reports, your parents used to walk 25 miles past hills and valleys to the nearest one-room schoolhouse. That's curious. That's curious because that's a joke that what boomers used to say about their parents, the silence. I don't know why she would lead with that. But now your children attend virtual classes via Zoom calls from their bed. The times, they're always changing. But these days, as the oldest members of Gen Z are graduating to their 20s, there's a rush to understand the demographic that's about to attain a new level of purchasing power. In an annual survey of U.S. teens, financial firm Piper Sandler offers some insight into the minds and wallets of the Zoomer, or as I like to say, Conzoomer population. Where do they eat? What do they wear? Who do they follow? Not what they believe in, because those things aren't important. For starters, it found Instagram might have a new teen problem on its hands. It's no longer the favorite social media platform among that age group. Snapchat and TikTok take the top 2 spots, while Instagram dropped several points from the previous year. This development comes years after Instagram's parent company, Facebook, began wrestling with its own aging user base. Among other consumer products, Nike and Apple are clear favorites. Nike was the top clothing brand by 20 percentage point and the top footwear brand by 44 percentage point. And according to the report, 88% of teens own an iPhone and 90% expect an iPhone to be their next phone. Amazon, meanwhile, was the top shopping website by far, with 56% of the market voting it number 1. What does this tell me? It tells me, for all this talk about how woke Gen Z is, well, when it comes to consuming, they are not very woke at all. Nike, sweatshops. Apple, sweatshops. Also children mining for cobalt in the Congo. Food was the greatest wallet priority listed, with Chick-fil-A, Starbucks, and Chipotle making up the top 3 restaurants. So, Gen Z is not saving money then. It's content to spend it all on pro food. And furthering a millennial trend, the youngest generation all seems to be socially conscious, apart from, their love of Nike and Apple and Amazon for that matter. 15% of teens consumed sustainable plant-based meat, with Impossible Foods and Beyond Meat tied for top share, and nearly 40% named racial equality and the environment as personal causes, except in what they buy, of course. If you're wondering where the survey respondents, which include 7,000 American teens with an average age of 16.1 years, got their spending cash, the report says 33% hold a part-time job. But not to be discounted are parental contributions, which provided a majority, 61% of the total money spent. The average household income for respondents was $76,750, suggesting a slightly more affluent crowd. So there are more facts here from Piper Sandler. Teen self-reported spending improved slightly to $2,165. Parent contribution was 61%. Female spending inflecting for clothing at plus 9% year over year, strongest such gain since 2015. Male spending still down. 46% of teens believe the economy is getting worse versus 48% in fall. 25% of teens believe it is getting better. Skincare spending for females ahead of makeup spending, seeing modest recovery in overall beauty wallet. Teens allocate 8% of their shopping time to secondhand. 47% of teens have purchased and 55% have sold secondhand. Yes, food returns as teens' number one wallet priority at a 23% share. 15% of teens consume plant-based meat. Video games are 9% of teen wallet share versus 8% last year. 53% expect to purchase a next-generation console, and 4% already own. Teens spend 32% of their daily video consumption on Netflix, followed by YouTube at 31%. Cash is still king for teens as top payment method, followed by Apple Pay. Venmo is the most used payment app. 9% of teens claim to have traded cryptocurrency. 81% of these teens are male. Handbag spending improved to $93, up 4% year over year and up 7% sequentially. Snapchat is the favorite social media platform with a 31% share, with TikTok at 30%, Instagram at 24%. Significant movement in top social and political issues led by racial equality, environment, and Black Lives Matter. Teens' favorite celebrity is Kevin Hart. Really? And most followed influencer is David Dobrik. I wonder who this David Dobrik fellow is. He's a Slovak YouTuber, podcaster, and co-founder of the app Dispo. Oh, okay. Oh, wait. A timeline of the David Dobrik allegations and controversies. Yeah. Aren't all of these YouTube celebrities, the male ones, accused of some form of sexual assault? Let's see. Dobrik is quick to give off boy next door energy as he soberly drives around his messy friend group, all while he receives Kids' Choice Awards and makes TikToks with Charli D'Amelio. Though he rose to fame on YouTube, he quickly pivoted to podcasting during the pandemic. He debuted his new podcast studio in his "I bought a new house" video. I can't be filming the videos that I would normally be making, like the vlogs, but here we have a controlled space and a controlled environment. This is really sad that, no, I'm never going to be able to afford a house, but look at this guy. He got to buy a house because he was on YouTube. Over the course of last year, various former friends and colleagues of Dobrik's came forward with allegations of sexual misconduct and bullying against him and his squad of young content creators. On March the 1st, Dobrik launched his new photo-sharing app, Dispo, and the reviews turned out to be the perfect platform for disappointed fans to air their grievances and demand accountability from him. Famous for ignoring controversies, Dobrik had remained silent on these issues. That is, until he released a 2-minute and 30-second video on his Views podcast channel launched just last month, titled Let's Talk. We've compiled a timeline of Dobrik's messy past and even messier present, so you can decide for yourself whether or not the king of YouTube is over for good. Yes. It used to be that American boys wanted to be what? Baseball players, football players, basketball players, astronauts. I don't know. Make apps, be a software tycoon. Now they want to make TikTok videos. It seems to be quite a cratering of ambition. This might have something to do with it. This is from Art Moore at World Net Daily. A new study by longtime evangelical Christian researcher George Barna finds that 94% of Americans do not hold a biblical worldview. The study found that the most common worldview among Americans, 88%, might be termed syncretism, said Barna, describing it as a disparate, irreconcilable collection of beliefs and behaviors that define people's lives. The 2021 edition of the American Worldview Inventory is the first of its kind to measure 7 prominent worldviews: biblical theism, secular humanism, postmodernism, moralistic therapeutic deism, nihilism, Eastern mysticism, and Marxism, along with its offshoot critical race theory. But Barna found that no single worldview was embraced by a significant percentage of Americans. Syncretism is a cut-and-paste approach to making sense of life, he explained. Rather than developing an internally consistent and philosophically coherent perspective, Americans embrace points of view or actions that feel comfortable or most convenient. Those beliefs and behaviors are often inconsistent or even contradictory, but few Americans seem troubled like that. Yes, as previously mentioned, we love Nike and Apple. Let's just not worry about the sweatshops, and Foxconn and children mining cobalt in the Congo or any of that. I love my iPhone. The survey found that only 2% of the public embrace secular humanism, while 1% of adults embody each of postmodernism, moralistic therapeutic deism, and nihilism. And while both Marxism and Eastern mysticism, also known as New Age, receive considerable media coverage, less than 0.5% subscribe to either worldview. So you say that the media is not reflecting what people actually think about? That's kind of a shocker. Moral therapeutic deism is the most common worldview at 39%. Spiritual skeptics, alphabet people, adults, those not registered to vote, political liberals, and individuals who attend a predominantly Black or Catholic church are the most common adherents of this worldview. Post-Christianity, one might call it. A biblical worldview at 31%. Sage cons, socially active, governance-engaged conservative Christians, theological evangelicals, born-again Christians, political conservatives, and registered Republicans are most likely to possess a biblical theism perspective. 16% choose secular humanism. Spiritual skeptics, residents of the West, people 75 or older, or political liberals dominate those who support this life perspective. People 75 or over? Doesn't look too good for the future. Postmodernism claims a 60% allegiance. Spiritual skeptics, residents of the northeastern and western states, people with a bachelor's degree, and political liberals are the most common adopters of postmodern beliefs and behaviors. Barna, in his more than 25 years of studying the subject, has found that worldview in America develops by default. Quote, very few schools' curriculum focuses directly on a person's worldview. Most adults don't even know what a worldview is, much less what the worldview alternatives are, how they differ, and which one they possess. We've been shocked at how few Christian schools, as well as religious congregations, directly address worldview issues. People generally adopt worldview beliefs and behaviors that they encounter in arts and entertainment vehicles, news reports, political statements made by public leaders, and through conversations and experiences with people they trust. Worldview is caught more than it is taught in the U.S., unquote. Well, I'm really not surprised that Christian schools are not meeting the challenge of the worldviews of their students being formed by, I don't know, people in the entertainment industry. And let's go to the chat. Hang on just a second here. Here we go. Hello to Yo Mama. No black pill. No, Dan. Pitsky, Tricky Who, Gracie Stahl, William Hicks, Goose, Picasso 88, Jokerkin 666. Hello to Professor Paul. Goose says time to liquidate boomer assets. Dan says neighbors are at it again. It just never stops. A picture-in-picture feed of what's going outside the window would be cool. Going on outside the window would be cool. Yes, indeed, it would be. Yesterday afternoon, I guess after the show, there were 3 young people surrounding another young person who seemed to be in the throes of a drug overdose or perhaps merely a psychotic episode. The person was bunched over, head down, close to the ground and moving around, like a gorilla or a chimpanzee. Well, various people asked what was wrong. I noticed that no one called 911. As I say, perhaps it was merely a personal crisis. Goose said only the very youngest Zoomers can have millennial parents. Most have Gen X parents. Justin Proto says, I wonder if these analyses factor in the general wealth distribution to fewer and fewer, which has accelerated since the 80s and gone into overdrive in the last 15 years. Hello to Roulette Crack. William Hicks says that $68 trillion ain't going to be worth anything after the COVID spending spree, climate change New Deal, and the loss of reserve currency status. U.S. society is broken. Few are prepared to recognize this. Of course, we'll just spend ourselves rich. And almost all of the elite have bought into this, or at the least that's what they say. I'm sure they're making private arrangements for themselves. Justin Proto says the reserve currency is the bomb, and less than 1 out of 1,000 can articulate it. Justin Proto says, when I grew up, it was thought that saving was important. Seems that financial time horizons have completely changed. All now, nothing for the future. That is how society goes to the poorhouse. Anman says, do the woke really care about sweatshops in Asia and elsewhere? What does it have to do with systemic racism and police killing innocent black children? Well, I don't know. How about children mining cobalt? That would seem to relate to Black Lives Matter. Wouldn't you think? Glencore getting children in the Congo to mine cobalt in exceedingly dangerous conditions. MF Superstar says voting for Yang and UBI beats saving for the future. William Hicks says nobody is really saving. Interest rate suppression by the Fed has radically altered incentives. There is no compound interest to be had. Banks offer practically nothing to their depositors. And this is a situation which has existed for, at least 20 years, and probably going back to closer to 30. And of course, this also affects older people, much older people as well, who had, put aside money, saving for their retirement in the expectation that they would be paid interest on that money. And of course, there's no reason to do that anymore when the Federal Reserve simply helicopters money to the banks. Picasso 88 says, Kevin Hart, WTF. I worked as a teenager basically to get hammered after, says Justin Proto. Well, there's something else that's disappeared. Teenagers, college students, used to be able to get good summer jobs at places like resorts. But it's all foreigners hired for these jobs now. What is the more clown word? Unboxing videos or first-time reaction videos, says Ann Run. Again, these blighted expectations. Here's a box from Amazon, and then, you make the soy face, the Soylent grin. Oh, come on. Come on, it can't be that exciting or anywhere close to that exciting. I wonder how performative this is. Oh, hello again to our Finnish friend, Jaakko Raipala. Obviously, BLM is about manipulating American politics. They don't care about Congolese children. Anran replies, right, but they do want those Congolese children to become American children. Yeah, the Soylent grin, it's that sort of look. It's a mark of submission that you see in primates. And one way that you can look at the Soylent grin is that these particular primates are indicating their submission to Amazon or to whatever company makes what is in the box that gets unboxed. Roulette Crack said, my first time reaction to KMG was positive. I loved him unboxing his new modern Good Times. I suppose I did that once on Luke Ford's show. I opened an Amazon box. I knew what was in it. Some people had sent me some Amazon gift certificates, so I knew what was in it. I was pleased to get it. I just wanted to get in on that trend. Yeah, so this the previous story had to do with the decline of Christianity in America, which cultural critics don't seem particularly interested in. It's because most of them are worthless. Here's a story from a year ago. Baptisms miracles taking place in revival at site where George Floyd died, Christian groups said. This is from Leonardo Blair at the Christian Post. A number of Christian groups that have been holding revival services at the site where George Floyd died in Minneapolis say they're seeing many people turn to God in baptisms and miracles are happening. So tonight, God's moving. There are a lot of people that gave their lives to the Lord again. We were baptizing people right here at the memorial. God's on the move. It's wonderful, said Joshua Lindquist, a young Christian leader with Global Revival Harvest. Revival is the new form of protest, says a fellow called J.T. Thomas, meaning when injustice happens and the pain is there, the best way to heal hearts and to bring what's right and to bring what's truly real is to petition heaven. When revival breaks out, it's the kingdom of heaven breaking in. Yes, I wonder how permanent these conversions will be. Eventually, people are going to lose interest in George Floyd, although perhaps he'll be like Emmett Till. And the New York Times will be talking about this man who died in 1955 as if he died, I don't know, a week ago. Later, more contemporaneously from Leonardo Blair, this is from yesterday, Hope, 10 Christian reactions to Derek Chauvin's conviction for murder of George Floyd. I'm not really seeing the Christian connection there, but never mind. Some wept, some cheered, some stood in silent reverence, absorbing the moment when it was announced that a jury had found Derek Chauvin guilty of second-degree murder, third-degree murder, and second-degree manslaughter. There was a joke at VDare. What was it? That, yes, they needed all three because it's like the Trinity, the Father, the Son, the Holy Ghost. Jamal Bryant, senior pastor of New Birth Missionary Baptist Church in Georgia, who traveled to Minnesota to pray with Floyd's family and offer support. There was no local support available, that Jamal had to come all the way from Georgia? Of course, Al Sharpton came as well. And who? Well, there's the hustler Jesse Jackson, who also apparently offered his support. Bryant wrote in a statement on Instagram, good morning to all the activists, protesters, prayer warriors, marchers, t-shirt wearers, petition signers, fist raisers, meme posters, barbershop philosophers, agitators, rabble-rousers, and candlelighters, Bryant wrote. Take a moment and breathe. This couldn't have happened without you. I don't know what he means by that. We made history. Are you suggesting that the jury was bullied into three guilty verdicts? Because that's an awful lot what that sounds like. All three counts and he going to jail. Give yourself a minute. It's all about you. He didn't say that, but that's his message. I know the fight continues, but don't let your gloves get tattered. I'm praying for you, proud of you, and cheering for you. Joe Biden, in Remarks Tuesday, a practicing Catholic, very satirical, called Floyd's killing a murder in the full light of day and the verdict a step forward. And more words from George Floyd's brother, Philanese, who said he prayed Chauvin would be convicted, said he was relieved by the verdict and compared his brother to Emmett Till. No. Emmett Till was this is a vastly different story. Emmett Till made some lewd comments to a married woman behind a counter in Mississippi. He was from Chicago, I believe, and he was visiting. And he was tortured for pleasure for hours. Let's see. More reactions. The Reverend Jeffrey Brown. Yes, let's quote the Gospel of Mark, which is also relevant to the George Floyd case. Pastor J.D. Greer of the Southern Baptist Convention said in a statement, I know that for persons of color, today's verdict ties into long-standing questions about justice and equal treatment under the law. As we said in the wake of this incident almost a year ago, we cannot remain silent when our brothers and sisters, friends, and our people we seek to convince of Jesus' love are mistreated, abused, or killed unnecessarily. And apparently this applies only to Black people and not to white people. Apparently it doesn't apply either to all of the Black people, the many Black people in the United States who are killed yearly over trifles, real or perceived, or killed by stray bullets, that sort of thing. But there's no police involvement in this. So it doesn't really count. As you all know, or most of you know, I live on an island. And now apparently I am trapped on this island. Not that I particularly want to leave it or have anywhere to go, but it's always nice to have that option. This is from Cindy Harnett of the Victoria Times Colonist. Province plans random checks at ferry terminals for non-essential travel. People who live in the Island Health Region, or as it was formerly known, Vancouver Island, should not be traveling for recreation between Victoria and Nanaimo, says BC Solicitor General Mike Farnworth, who is drafting orders against non-essential travel between health authorities that will include vehicle checks at ferry terminals. If you're in Victoria, don't go up to Nanaimo, Farnworth said yesterday. If you're in Nanaimo, don't go up to Port Hardy. That's already in place, and most people are doing the right thing. BC Premier John Horgan Monday announced a suite of measures focused on stopping non-essential movement between health authorities to limit the spread of the COVID-19 virus. BC Ferries has been asked not to take reservations for recreational vehicles traveling between health authorities, and tourism-oriented businesses such as hotels and tour companies have been asked not to take out-of-health authority bookings. What we are wanting to do is to limit recreational travel between health authorities, and so the ferry terminals with the island are an obvious location to do that. There will be counterattack. This is that nonsense where they just stop cars, for a mile or so, and then they check people to see whether they've been drinking. It's grossly unconstitutional, but it happens anyway. But counterattack. You're trying to leave your health district? Well, we are going to subject you to a counterattack. So these road checks at ferry terminals on and off Vancouver Island and the Gulf Islands, and possibly heading into the interior health region via the Hope-Princeton Highway or the Coquihalla Highway. Those whose travel between health authorities is deemed non-essential will be fined, although the amount has not yet been disclosed. Farnsworth said he expects to introduce measures in the legislature in the next few weeks to strengthen the ability to collect those fines. Quote, people will be paying them, unquote. Essential travel is loosely defined as the transport of essential goods and travel to medical appointments and for the purpose of child care. More detailed information on what is considered essential travel should be available by the end of the week. And of course, the tourism industry in Victoria has already been battered by COVID-19. Well, yes, severely battered. But now apparently they're looking for the coup de grace. This is from Robert Buffum at CTV. Vancouver Island hotels cancel bookings from BC mainland, but uncertainty over restrictions remains. Because that's what you're looking for in these restrictions, is uncertainty. Uncertainty is always the best for everyone concerned. In the wake of new travel restrictions announced Monday, some businesses are already taking action. That includes the Magnolia Hotel and Spa in Victoria, which is canceling reservations from guests who live outside the Vancouver Island Health Authority and are, or as we used to call it, Vancouver Island, and are traveling for non-essential reasons. Bill Lewis is the hotel's general manager. He says the loss of revenue in the short term is a sacrifice that's worthwhile if it means hotels can open in earnest and stay open during the summer. Yes, last spring it was, things will be back to normal by the summer or the fall or the winter or the spring of 2021. No, maybe now things will get back to normal in the summer of this year. Some pain now, and hopefully we can save the summer, Lewis said Wednesday. Bill Lewis seems to labor under the delusion that the government of BC and the latrine wallahs give a toss for him or for his business. In Tofino, where visitors have flocked for weeks, the Ocean Village Resort is also canceling reservations for non-essential travelers from the mainland and beyond through the May long weekend. They're also discouraging those from Vancouver Island from coming. Tofino is pretty much the end of the world as far as Canada goes. You cannot get any more west than Tofino. It is on the west side of Vancouver Island, the wrong side. There's two communities there, Tofino and Ucluelet, which is right outside. It's a long drive to Tofino from anywhere else on Vancouver Island. And if they are discouraging people from outside Tofino to come to Tofino, they might as well close their resort because they're not going to have any customers. What remains unclear to many, though, is how to handle travel within a health authority. Yes, because it's the government's business to tell you where you can go and for what reason. That, I'm afraid, is the new normal. This is from the Post-Millennial. Come on, load. Quebec and Ontario premiers write letter to Prime Minister Trudeau asking for more border restrictions limits on flights. Of course, they could have done this at the very beginning, but no, we don't want to inconvenience the Chinese by shutting down flights from Wuhan, say. Ontario Premier Doug Ford and Quebec Premier François Legault wrote a letter on Thursday to Prime Minister Trudeau asking for stricter border measures, which they believe will help contain the spread of COVID. The rising number and percentage of COVID-19 cases that are identified as variants, variants, is a concern for us all. In the third wave, the spread of infection as a consequence of new variants of concern is increasing at an alarming rate. We are seeing a steady increase in positive cases despite the measures currently in place. To protect the lives and well-being of our citizens, to ensure the health system is not further stretched, and to give time for the vaccine rollout to protect the people, Canadians, we need the federal government to further strengthen measures at air and land borders. And in Alberta, Jason Kenney, my old friend, is being attacked from both the right and the left. From the right, for stripping Albertans of their liberties, and from the left for not stripping the liberties faster and harder. This is from Don Braid. Explosive letter circulating within the United Conservative Party calls for Kenney's resignation. And I was really struck by the use of the word perceived in this story. The right-wingers who are calling for Kenny's resignation, Braid explains, the anger is deeply tied to COVID-19 rules, their perceived breach of freedoms, and the harm to business. Perceived. It's rather like free speech, isn't it? Well, hate speech isn't free speech. If your freedoms are all taken away because of a health panic, well, that's just a perceived breach of freedom. I mean, why not just justify it? Why not just justify it instead of talking about a perceived loss of freedoms? If you're told to stay home, if you're told that you can't see the cherry blossoms, if you're told that you can't eat indoors, if you're told that you have to wear masks indoors, and apparently if you're outside and within 6 feet or 2 meters, you have to wear masks. That seems to me to be more than a perceived loss of freedom. And let's go back to the chat. Hang on just a second here. Here we go. Double mutant variants, says Dan. Hikma Warrior says the nicest persons I ran into today were a Japanese and Iranian lady. Tofino is a long way from Tipperary, says William Hicks. I went to Tofino once, and I was lucky. I was there in July, where the average high temperature is 69 degrees Fahrenheit. And it rains in Tofino something like about 300 days a year. And I was there for a couple of days, and it was actually sunny. It wasn't particularly warm, but it was sunny. There's nothing to see in Tofino itself. I dragged a friend along with me. I promised him naked hippie women worshiping the moon. But all the activity in Tofino is in the resorts south of Tofino itself. I was walking in the city, near the ocean, at 8 o'clock at night or whatever, absolutely deserted. Absolutely deserted. People go to the beach there. That's why they go to Tofino. And you got to pay a lot of money to go to the beach. Metal Mike says Ford might have bumbled the COVID file, but that doesn't make him a racist, but not according to over 60 U of T historians and professors. I used to be in favor of universities having robust humanities departments. Not anymore. They should be defunded. Oh, MF Superstar says humanities departments need to be shut down if Western culture is to be preserved. GC Style says, good old Doug, forget spread taking place with essential workers. Let's lock down everyone else from each other, travel, and make snowbirds go to COVID hotels. Jay Miller says there is a major problem with uni admins. They make a ton of money for doing nothing. They are the biggest sinecures. If they were paid a ton of money for doing nothing, that would be one thing. They are being paid a ton of money to make everyone's lives worse. Big D says, I remember when racist meant something. Well, as Peter Simple said, which I fully endorse, this word should be used only within inverted commas. It has no efficacy. Steve says, administrative bloat is a huge problem in universities, especially the diversity-related type. Well, you see this, it's perfect. I worked at a university for 12 years, and I knew a lot of professors, and I got the impression from a lot of them that they thought that the university life was just about perfect, except for one thing, students. If you're an administrator, you don't really have much to do with students, do you? So that's the best kind of university work. Big D says, I'm glad I'm on KMG's team. I'm not alone. Well, thank you for that. Cecil Henry says I can't use that word, which you used, but it demonstrates a basic truth. Government meddling always makes things worse, much worse. It's called moral hazard. MF Superstar says, King sartorially impeccable, always nice in this age of ubiquitous slovenliness. Yeah, I blame the elite for that to a large extent. Oh, I'm rich, and I'm not going to dress up as rich people used to dress up, even at work. I'm a regular guy. I'm just like you. No, you're not, and you should stop pretending because it's insulting. Anwen says, how can you be trapped, Kevin? It is called swimming. A Goose says, if you support BLM and you call yourself a Christian, you're either not a Christian or you're just an idiot. Anren asks a good question. Would any of the Floyd family give up the $27 million if it brought George back to life? Contracu says, was Emmett Till intoxicated with lethal levels of fentanyl as well? I'm confused. I should also have mentioned that Emmett Till was quite a young man as opposed to George Floyd, who was, middle-aged and approaching old. That is to say, he should have known better. Matthew Gubbins says KMG should change his Twitter avatar to a soy unpacking face so his follower count goes up. Word is George was essentially estranged from his family, says MF Superstar. Yes, this is true. It is absolutely true. Enron says, movie first-time reaction videos could in theory be interesting, but most of those who do them don't have anything interesting to say about the movies. Jonathan Pohl says students are not as bad as administrators, but in Kurdistan, the vast majority of students had no desire to learn anything. They refused to do any reading or pay attention to lectures. Well, that was my experience as an undergraduate. I'm the only person who read what I was supposed to read? Oh, no. So I'm supposed to fill up all this time by talking to the tutorial leader because no one else is going to dare say anything. Jay Miller says, Professor Pohl has some hilarious stories of students demanding A's for failing. Okay, let's talk about mutants. This is from the London Sun. World's most mutated COVID strain with 34 mutations is found as fears grow super variant might prolong pandemic. They're cheering for this. They're cheering for it. Biological Fukushima. Yeah, okay. The viruses have never mutated before. Everybody knows that. You would think that we hear so much from epidemiologists these days and have for over a year now, that perhaps someone could explain about viruses mutating. Frank Burton sent me this, universal mental illness. He commented, this is from a tweet by Genevieve Campbell, who quotes a science reporter at the Toronto Star named Jennifer Yang, who solely covers the coronavirus beat. And we'll never know how she got infected, but I know her daycare friends and staff are the only people she interacts with outside of her household. We never bring her into stores, rarely to playgrounds, and so far, my husband and I have both tested negative. This woman looks as if she is in her 20s, perhaps her early 30s. What's life like right now? We're double masking 24/7 in the house with a N95 and surgical mask. The windows are open all day to improve ventilation, which means wearing toques and multiple sweaters indoors. Today's snowfall isn't helping. We eat our meals separately, sleep in different rooms, disinfect constantly, and hand wash to the point where our skin is cracked and bleeding. I spent a day clearing our unfinished basement of junk boxes and dead millipedes just in case one of us needs to move down there. 8 days into this, our daughter seems okay, and I think we will be too. But the stress of living with COVID in your own home, the threat of infection hanging over your head like a guillotine, is hard to convey. I've had a tightness in my chest since last Wednesday. The thing that really makes me sick is knowing our family is now part of a chain of infections that could kill or hospitalize another person. And of course, before COVID, that condition never obtained in the world. When I heard there was a second confirmed case at our daycare, I cried almost as much as I did when our daughter tested positive. I worry about her daycare friends and their families. I also worry about the daycare staff who have not yet been prioritized for vaccination, even as we've kept daycares open across Ontario and demanded that these women, the ECEs at my daycare are all women, continue going to work. This is a science reporter at the Toronto Star, entirely on the coronavirus beat. Genevieve Campbell comments this is part of a larger pattern. Reporters and academic scientists with medical anxiety have disproportionately shaped and are continuing to shape pandemic media coverage. It's what's forming and setting the boundaries of discourse. Twitter is not real life, he screams before switching tabs over to a Zoom school board meeting in which 3 of this journalist's articles are cited. I thought scientists were supposed to be sober men and women. Kathy Gingell writes at that excellent site, conservativewoman.co.uk, fear-mongering, false narrative, and profiteering, the truth about COVID. In a speech titled Time to Reopen Society at the March 2021 inaugural BizNews Investment Conference in South Africa, Nick Hudson, co-founder of Pandemics Data and Analytics, comes to the devastating conclusion that every single element of the COVID narrative has been false. In a way not done before, he pulls together everything from changing WHO recommendations to masks making no difference, from suppression measures shifting the disease burden onto the vulnerable, through to unnecessary vaccine programs. By following the data and official communications from global organizations, he unravels what transpired to lead us into deleterious lockdowns, which continue to have enormous negative impacts across the world. Again, this is at conservativewoman.co.uk. He begins, Nick Hudson, Panda started off as a conversation, really a group of 4 friends, professionals, an economist, doctor, lawyer, and an actuary. What we shared was an observation that the data and the facts, the reality of coronavirus, was far, far away from what the media and public health institutions were presenting to the world. And we saw in that problem the seeds of a great tragedy. Our world is gripped by fear, and that fear is very much the product of a false narrative. When I say it's a false narrative, I'm telling you that every single element of this narrative is false. The narrative says that there's a deadly virus spreading across the planet, that nobody's immune to it, and there's no cure. Even asymptomatic people can spread it and are major drivers of the epidemic of disease. And unless we lock down and wear our masks until vaccines arrive and everybody gets vaccinated, we're all going to die. And anybody who challenges this narrative is a lunatic, a menace, a danger to society, hence the suppression. But it is and always been absolutely clear to us that there is no element of this narrative is justified in the face of reality. The reality is that there is a virus. It is having a meaningful impact in some regions of the world. Very few people are susceptible to generating severe disease. There are several available treatments. Asymptomatic people in a more sensible era, known otherwise as healthy people, are not drivers of the epidemic. Lockdowns and mask mandates have been ruled out by pre-COVID science for good reasons, never recommended. They have been tried, they have not worked, and they have caused great harm. Instead of protecting the vulnerable minority, we have hurt them. This is ground zero for the malarkey of COVID. This statement, the greatest misrepresentation of all time. 2 sentences, which by themselves are true. It's true that the case fatality rate for COVID at this time was about 3.4%, and it's also true that the flu generally kills far fewer than 1%. In fact, most people would say 0.1% of those infected, not of the cases, the people who arrive at hospital. But by conflating those 2 separate points, CFR and IFR, the Director General of the World Health Organization was effectively lying. And this man, scientist John Ioannidis, one of the greatest infectious disease specialists in the world, picked it up a few days later. He said that the statistic causes horror and is meaningless, and he's right. 5 months later, the WHO had no option but to publish his paper, which demonstrated the extent to which he was right, showing that the infection fatality rate for coronavirus was not 3.4%, but 0.23%. And more impressively, for those people under the age of 70, it was a mere 0.05%, which is to say negligible. Yeah, there seems to be an ulterior motive involved here. CNN's Dr. Sanjay Gupta answers a question for us. Do you need to wear a mask outside? Particularly those who are vaccinated. The vast majority of COVID-19 transmission is not happening outdoors. Less than 10% of cases happen outside. That's the number I've seen. And it is nearly 19 times more likely for transmission to occur indoors. For the most part, you don't need to wear a mask outdoors, Gupta said, but people need to use common sense and should consider if they will be clustered together and the case rate in their area. Oh, yeah, I'm going outside. Should I wear a mask? What are the latest figures on the case rate in my area? The real question you need to try to answer is, what's the likelihood I'm going to breathe in someone else's air? Okay. Well, the likelihood you're ever going to be breathing in someone else's air when you're outside is quite low because the atmosphere is vast. How safe is it to eat inside a restaurant? He answers, ventilation and crowding are big concerns with indoor dining. I think most places in the country, certainly full capacity indoor dining, I can't imagine that it would be advised. It's still just too risky. There's still too great a chance that you're going to actively potentially be exposed to the virus. Well, why is it that when we first heard about COVID-19, it was people in old age homes, long-term care facilities, who were dropping like flies? That's because they are crammed into rooms and it's going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. They don't go outside. It is congestion of people indoors for long periods of time, or relatively long periods of time, that leads to people being infected with COVID-19. But again, we talk about infection. People talk about people having a disease. And what does that mean when we're talking about people without symptoms? Michelle Malkin writes at VDare, attention parents, if your children are online, they are being bombarded by an inescapable public relations campaign by all the bigs, big pharma, big government, and big tech to brainwash them about the COVID vaccine. While children under 18 remain at the lowest risk of COVID-19, peer pressure to get the experimental jabs is enormous. That groupthink is compounded by relentless messaging from politicians, celebrities, and social media influencers posting virtue signaling photos of themselves, flaunting their arm band-aids and immunization papers. The playing field is rigged by internet titans who ban all dissenters and label all skepticism as misinformation or conspiracy theory. It's mass agitation and propaganda. Yes, that would make the old Soviet Marxists proud. Who's on board? Well, the Ad Council, Facebook, Google, NBC Universal, GM, Verizon, Walgreens, Walmart, Amazon, Apple, and CBS Viacom has earmarked $50 million to persuade skeptics to believe in coronavirus vaccines. Once again, if the vaccines were safe and efficacious, who wouldn't get the vaccine? I mean, if everyone thought it was safe and efficacious, then I'm sure there'd be some mulish people who wouldn't. But there's this assumption that people can't be trusted in any regard, ever. Your kids should know that their favorite Disney stars, Twitch video gamers, and even Sesame Street characters have been recruited to pimp the COVID-19 vaccine. One Instagram star and fashion blogger with 409,000 followers, South Carolina entrepreneur Whitney Rife Becker, spilled the beans on how two vaccine campaigns paying thousands of dollars had contacted her to go and get the vaccine and record it and take a selfie while getting the vaccine. She was asked to tell her followers how excited she was to take the vaccine and to gush about how much she would be able to do when she submitted to the shots. She was promised that an unnamed entity would put money behind her Instagram videos or photo posts. if she boosted the COVID vaccine. She rejected the offers, but many others have accepted the bribery. And we'll go to lockdown skeptics. Boris is the great appeaser. That would be Boris Johnson, who caves into the experts at the expense of ordinary people. This is from Dr. Timothy Bradshaw, a retired Oxford theological lecturer. Allegra Stratton, Boris's replacement for Lee Cain as policy communicator in number 10 Downing Street, has gone to the BBC as an echo analyst after a short spell of announcing nothing. Maybe she offended Kerry too. And that communications room, fitted out for a couple of million, won't be used. So that reset of number 10 has itself been reset, maintaining that sense of fairground chaos so beloved of our leaders. But his utterances are, as Janet Daly has shown in her Telegraph column, less and less convincing, and are being taken as incoherent by a growing number of intelligent people, not just conspiracy theorists. He bizarrely proclaimed that the successful lowering of COVID cases and deaths in the UK was not caused by the vaccination program, but by lockdowns, which therefore must remain the chief weapon against the epidemic if the epidemic should return. Hence the shutting of the Nightingale isolation hospitals and no plan for future epidemics being developed. As Daly said, this statement was surely plain wrong and also politically a gaffe, as it portrayed his one massive success as an irrelevance. It also would discourage the population from offering to be vaccinated, a Macron blunder. Why this idiocy from our leader? Because he's not a serious person and never has been, perhaps? When Professor Neil Ferguson and his team at Imperial College London have been challenged on their model's miserable failure to predict the pandemic death toll in Sweden, they've always pushed back, saying they didn't model Sweden, disavowing the work of the team at Uppsala University, which adapted their modeling to the Swedish context. But it turns out this is not exactly accurate. Yeah, how about that? Royal College of GPs opposed to mandatory vaccination. Professor Carol Sikora tweeted, vaccine passports, mass testing, and all these other grand schemes. The question we have to ask is, would government attention be better spent tackling other issues? Cancer crisis, fixing the isolation system, mental health problems? I know which list I think is more pressing. Fifth of government COVID contracts raised red flags for possible corruption. Again, not a surprise. Age standardized mortality rate drops 26% from February to March. Oh, and the EU will not take up the option to buy 100 million extra COVID vaccines from AstraZeneca. Well, not really a surprise there. COVID passports proving vaccine status will be introduced in time for the return of overseas travel. Yeah, you don't need to get the vaccination, but you can never leave Britain if you don't. That is the carrot and the stick. And we will end this segment as traditional with a look in at Alex Berenson's Twitter feed. And this flurry of stories about not wearing masks outside is beyond embarrassing, and not just because it comes a year late. How else to read this except as elite media outlets actively collaborating with the Centers for Disease Control, in this case, to give the vaccinated peasants a little treat? We are far past the moment, if we ever were in one, which is unclear, when a public health emergency justifies this lapdog behavior by the New York Times et al. The CDC is a government bureaucracy as deserving of skepticism as any other, more, in fact, based on its recent performance. A reader points to a very worrisome finding in the CDC Chicago nursing home report. Patients L19, a 49-year-old staffer, and M20, a 7-year-old resident, both had very low PCR threshold counts. The nurse was under 17 and no symptoms. Why does this matter? And why does it matter? Lower PCR counts mean a person has a heavier viral load and is thus both more likely to be very sick and more infectious. That's why people with PCRs over 30 or certainly 35 don't need to be quarantined. These two should have been entirely symptomatic. Instead, the vaccine seems to have protected them from feeling sick, but not from being thoroughly infected and potentially spreading the virus. This is evidence for a possible Marek's disease outcome, where vaccinated people spread the virus aggressively to the unvaccinated. That doesn't sound good. And back to Canada from Pegida, Canada. RCMP officially reciting call to prayer in Canada. The RCMP in Alberta were honored to be invited for the first time to participate in part of a Ramadan ceremony on Friday, April 16th at the Akram Joma Mosque in Calgary. The invitation included the Islamic call to prayer recited by a Corporal Nadir Khalil at sunset around 8 p.m. Yes, the call to prayer recited in the public square in Canada. Allah is great, Allah is great, Allah is great, Allah is great. I bear witness that there is no God except Allah. I bear witness that Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. Hurry to the prayer, hurry to the prayer, hurry to salvation. Allah is great, there is no God except Allah. And yes, we have uniformed RCMP officers taking part in this officially, which they would never dare do with any other expression of religious faith. Although, actually, maybe the Sikhs. Perhaps the Sikhs. And I'm going to move on to further consideration of Hilaire Belloc's book, The Servile State. It was property that made the slave. Prisoners of war taken in set combat afforded one mode of recruitment, and there was also the raiding of men by pirates in the outer lands and the selling of them in the slave markets of the South. But at once the cause of the recruitment and the permanent support of the institution of slavery was the indigence of the man who sold himself into slavery, or was born into it. For it was a rule of pagan slavery that the slave bred the slave, and that even if one of the parents were free, the offspring was a slave. The society of antiquity, therefore, was normally divided, as must at last be the society of any servile state, into clearly marked sections. There was upon the one hand the citizen who had a voice in the conduct of the state, who would often labor, but labor of his own free will, and who was normally possessed of property. Upon the other hand, there was a mass dispossessed of the means of production and compelled by positive law to labor at command. It is true that in the further developments of society, the accumulation of private savings by a slave was tolerated, and that slaves so favored did sometimes purchase their freedom. It is further true that in the confusion of the last generations of paganism, there arose in some of the great cities a considerable class of men who, though free, were dispossessed of the means of production. But these last never existed in a sufficient proportion to stamp the whole state of society with a character drawn from their proletarian circumstance. To the end, the pagan world remained a world of free proprietors possessed in various degrees of the land and of the capital, whereby wealth may be produced, and applying to that land and capital for the purpose of producing wealth, compulsory labor. Certain features in that original servile state from which we all spring should be carefully noted by way of conclusion. First, though all nowadays contrast slavery with freedom to the advantage of the latter, yet men then accepted slavery freely as an alternative to indigence. Secondly, and this is most important for our judgment of the servile institution as a whole, and of the chances of its return, in all those centuries we find no organized effort, nor, which is still more significant, do we find any complaint of conscience against the institution which condemned the bulk of human beings to forced labor. Slaves may be found in the literary exercises of the time bewailing their lot and joking about it. Some philosophers will complain that an ideal society should contain no slaves. Others will excuse the establishment of slavery upon this plea or that, while granting that it offends the dignity of man. But the greater part will argue of the state that it is necessarily servile. But no one, slave or free, dreams of abolishing or even changing the thing. You have no martyrs for the case of freedom as against slavery. The so-called servile wars are the resistance on the part of escaped slaves to any attempt at recapture. but they are not accompanied by an accepted affirmation that servitude is an intolerable thing, nor is that note struck at all from the unknown beginnings to the Catholic endings of the pagan world. Slavery is irksome, undignified, woeful, but it is to them of the nature of things. You may say, to be brief, that this arrangement of society was the very air which pagan antiquity breathed. Its great works, its leisure and its domestic life, its humor, its reserves of power, all depend upon the fact that its society was that of the servile state. Men were happy in that arrangement, or at least as happy as men ever are. The attempt to escape by a personal effort, whether of thrift, of adventure, or of flattery to a master from a servile condition, had never even so much of driving power behind it as the attempt many show today to escape from the rank of wage earners to those of employers. Servitude did not seem a hell into which a man would rather die than sink, or out of which at any sacrifice whatsoever a man would raise himself. It was a condition accepted by those who suffered it as much as by those who enjoyed it, and a perfectly necessary part of all that men did and thought. You find no barbarian from some free place astonished at the institution of slavery. You find no slave pointing to a society in which slavery was unknown as towards a happier land. To our ancestors, not only for those few centuries during which we have record of their actions, but apparently during an illimitable past, the division of society into those who must work under compulsion and those who would benefit by their labor was the very plan of the state, apart from which they could hardly think of society as existing at all. Let this be clearly grasped. It is fundamental to an understanding of the problem before us. Slavery is no novel experience in the history of Europe, nor is one suffering an odd dream when one talks of slavery as acceptable to European men. Slavery was of the very stuff of Europe for thousands upon thousands of years, until Europe engaged upon that considerable moral experiment called the faith, which many believe to be now accomplished and discarded, and in the failure of which it would seem that the old and primary institution of slavery must return. For there came upon us Europeans, after all those centuries and centuries of a settled social order, which was erected upon slavery as upon a sure foundation, the experiment called the Christian Church. Among the byproducts of this experiment, very slowly emerging from the old pagan world and not long completed before Christendom itself suffered a shipwreck, was the exceedingly gradual transformation of the servile state into something other, a society of owners. And how that something other did proceed from the pagan servile state, I will next explain. And I will have more to say on Belloch's book tomorrow. I talked yesterday about a woman, a very big deal, apparently, in the Black intellectual world, named Bree Newsom. And this is what she had to say yesterday. I know people are uncomfortable when I compare whiteness to cannibalism, but I don't know how else you explain a culture that for centuries has been fixated with killing Black people and consuming their bodies in some form or fashion. I think that because whiteness has been the dominant force, it's been the norm for white supremacist scientists to normalize the othering of non-white people, and few people, if any, have turned that lens on whiteness to examine the pathology of white people's obsession with skin color. What this woman is saying, essentially, is that white people are witches. Now, of course, this is part of Black liberation theology, which holds that white people were created a long time ago by a evil, mad scientist called Yakub, who had a big, big brain. You can see it in GIFs throbbing if you do an image search. Yes, and this is considered to be a respectable person, this woman, Bree Newsom, but she is clearly deranged. White people do not think about race very much, and they do not think about Black people very much. And white men, specifically, give exceedingly very little thought to Black women, for the simple reason, I mean, it may sound offensive, but it's true, that white men, in the main, do not find Black women attractive. But no, apparently, white people are men and women are obsessed with black people and their bodies, and nothing could be further from the truth. Uh, we saw there's a form of journalism. It's called the YOY story. You know what I'm talking about. Such and such a thing happened. YOY. Well, there's a condition that needs to be present for the YOY story to work, in that the events that you are stating actually happened. Someone called Peniel Joseph, who is the Barbara Jordan Chair in Ethics and Political Values and the founding director of the Center for the Study of Race and Democracy at the LBJ School of Public Affairs at the University of Texas at Austin, where he's also a professor of history. He's the author of several books, most recently The Sword and the Shield, The Revolutionary Lives of Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. And it is about the shooting death of Ma'Khia Bryant. It's a reminder that we have a long way to go. Details of the Ohio shooting are still emerging. Then perhaps you should have waited for these details to be revealed before you commented. According to police officials and body cam footage shared with the public, the teenager was holding a knife and charged two other females. But many are openly questioning why this young teenager could not have been subdued with non-lethal force. Yes, you have one teenage girl here and you have another teenage girl here, and you've got one who is about to slit her throat or gut her. The policeman was some distance away, non-lethal force. These clowns have absolutely no idea how deadly edged weapons are, and even for trained professionals, how difficult it is to ward off a knife attack. Oh no, maybe they shot a tranquilizer dart at her instead. A young woman's life, a young black woman's life, was probably saved by the actions of this police officer, but it was a white man, so ipso facto, wrong. It's not just black people who are saying that, as we shall find. Federale writing at VDare. So there we have it. Con Inc., alt-right civic nationalists, and the NRA spokesmouth Dana Lash are attacking hero white cop Derek Chauvin, he who bravely found, fought with, and successfully arrested violent black career criminal George Floyd. Whether it is one of the most censored men on the internet, Jared Taylor, who called Chauvin a psychopath, to Rush Limbaugh calling him a killer, to normally level-headed vlogger donut operator, a former cop who usually defends cops based on elements, but who blasted Chauvin and blamed him for the rioting based on nothing more than panic, to Mike Penovich of The Daily Shoah, who called Chauvin a killer. The right has lost its collective mind. Yeah, not racist, not racist, not racist, not racist. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. If you are the wrong color, you are a racist. It's that simple. This is from Jack Derschlag at Fox News. LeBron James faces backlash over your next tweet about Ohio police officer. And I'm looking at a picture of LeBron James here, and he's hideous. He looks like a monster. He looks like a creation who would scare children. Michael Jordan did not look like a monster. Will Chamberlain didn't look like a monster. Elgin Baylor didn't look like a monster. Is it because he looks like a monster that he has become such a prominent cultural figure? That's a serious question, by the way. Oh, LeBron James addressed his now deleted tweet. I'm so damn tired of seeing black people killed by police. Is he claiming exhaustion as well? Oh, yes, and he's speaking out on the case of Ma'Khia Bryant. Yeah, desperate for accountability. Yes, and there's the officer, and you're next. Okay. Oh, and there's an hourglass there. Oh, I guess he didn't have much time. Doesn't have much time if LeBron James has his way. Oh, Jill Filipovic, or Filipovich. She is a white American woman of Serbian descent. I don't know. When you look at leading feminists in the United States, it often becomes a question of which of them is more idiotic than the other. She weighs in on the shooting of this 16-year-old girl. It's utterly bizarre and entirely backwards that many Americans believe police officers should use a lower threat threshold before using deadly violence than an average citizen. The officer who killed Jamal Bryant literally brought a gun to a knife fight, and people still blame her. When you talk about bringing a gun to a knife fight, the implication is that you would be involved in this fight. This was one teenage girl attempting to murder the other one after giving notice of this, by the way. If you are an agent of the state, given a weapon by the state and trained by the state, you should be required to meet a higher threshold than an average person when using deadly violence. Instead, the reverse is true, and cops shoot people in the back. Yeah, okay. Jill Filipovich lives in a $3.4 million apartment in Brooklyn. I would guess that there's not a lot of stabbings in her neighborhood. Also, if this woman used a stronger de-aging filter on the pictures of herself that she publishes, she would become invisible. This is from RT last month. Author and lawyer Jill Filipovich came under fire online after she seemed to imply that stay-at-home mothers were setting a bad example for their children by not working. In response to a story published by Slate featuring a letter from a man who didn't want his wife to become a stay-at-home mother, Filipovich published a long series of Twitter posts supporting the positions. "I would have a really, really hard time being married to a spouse who chose not to work," she wrote, before asking, "What example are you setting when dad works for pay and mom gets the care work at home?" Lots of reasons not to want to set that example for a child. Filipovich faced a barrage of criticism, including from stay-at-home mothers who accused the journalist of being awful, anti-woman, and anti-feminist. "So it's only okay to take care of kids if someone pays you for it?" questioned one user, while another commented, "My wife values time with the kids more than money or a career. I work to provide that. Why do we need to continue to pretend that people get more fulfillment from life if they make lots of money?" Well, yes, if there's no cash nexus, according to Jill Filipovich, then there is no worth. So presumably, the leisure that Aristotle wrote about, that we work in order to have leisure, that leisure itself is worthless because one is not being paid to do it. The enjoyment that one takes from life, clearly worthless because it is not being paid for. There is no cash nexus. Oh, okay. Oh, yes. Before I move on to Theater Thursday, I want to talk about a couple of celebrities. Demi Lovato is back in the news. Why this woman is ever in the news? Oh, she's a drug addict. She's a food addict. And we're interested in that because what? Because she's a beloved national institution. You may recall that the amusingly named Ariana Grande became notorious some years ago when she and a friend were found late at night in a donut shop in LA, licking donuts that they didn't intend to buy and yelling that they hated America. That's the sort of event that would have kiboshed people's careers back in the past, but I guess it merely established her as being quirky. This is from the Daily Mail. LA frozen yogurt store denies receiving donation from Demi Lovato and shares photoshopped images of fabricated claims amid ongoing social media feud. The war of words began when Lovato claimed she'd been triggered by the store's sugar-free and diet menu items. I read and reread her Instagram post about her triggering and apparently the existence of food that is not high in calories or sugar or whatever is triggering to Demi Lovato, that apparently there's an attempt made to shame her. Well, we know that diet food doesn't work because people simply eat a lot more of it. There is a rather two simple ways. I'm reminded of a famous, this goes back decades, from Doonesbury, when Jane Fonda was carrying on when she was the exercise queen, fitness queen of America. And at a press conference, Jane Fonda says, after 20 years, I have found the way to lose weight and keep it off. Eat less, exercise more. And one of the journalists says, it took you 20 years to figure this out? And she said, male doctors kept the truth from me. So she thinks that she is being shamed. I can't imagine. Again, of course, the universe is all about Demi Lovato and her various addictions. Let's see. Finding extremely hard to order froyo from the Big Chill when you have to walk past tons of sugar-free cookies, other diet foods before you get to the counter. Do better, please. I will be calling out harmful messaging from brands or companies that perpetuate a society that not only enables, but praises disordered eating. Hashtag diet culture vultures. On its own Instagram page, which has nearly 12,000 followers, the Big Chill responded Sunday by explaining that it offers food items for people with diabetes and celiac disease, as well as options for vegans and many indulgent choices. Yes, the whole experience was triggering and awful, Demi Lovato said. You can carry things for other people, also caring for another percentage of your customers who struggle daily just to even step foot in your store. I don't understand that. If you're a high-calorie person, typically you are blind when it comes to the low-calorie stuff. It's just nothing. That, yes, this is what I want to eat. But apparently, the availability of options is somehow an attempt to shame, to humiliate, to trigger Demi Lovato. You can carry things for other people while also caring for another percentage of your customers who struggle daily. Just to even step foot in your store, you can find a way to provide an inviting environment for all people with different needs, including eating disorders, one of the deadliest mental illnesses, second only to opioid overdoses. You don't want to mess with me. You're in the wrong, and the customer is always right. I thought, at the time of 2007, 2008, the celebrities were going to tone down their act because they were already hated by a great many people in the Western world, and that if they didn't pull it back, tone it down, bad things would start happening to them. Nope, they've got worse. And I guess trends always get worse until there is a change, a big change. Speaking of another obnoxious person, Paris Hilton apparently is engaged in a desire to reinvent herself. I don't know. How long have we known about this woman? 20 years or so? And she always has that same false, smug look on her face. Whereas actually, when she is not making that stupid look, she's actually a pretty good-looking woman. But let's get to her complaint. This is from Refinery 29. In a new interview with Vanity Fair, Paris Hilton has revealed that her infamous 2004 sex tape leak is something that will hurt me for the rest of my life. 17 years later, she's still dealing with the repercussions, including long-term trauma and PTSD. It's always there in the back of my mind, Hilton said, calling the non-consensual leak and following media frenzy humiliating. When it happened, people were so mean about it to me. The way I was spoken about on nightly talk shows in the media to see things with my family was just heartbreaking. I would be in tears every single day. I didn't want to leave my house. I felt like my life was over. Today, the release of the tape by Hilton's ex, poker player Rick Solomon, would be considered revenge porn. It was a private experience between two people, Hilton explained. You love someone, you trust someone, and to have your trust betrayed like that for the whole world to be watching and laughing, it was even more hurtful to me to have these people think that I did this on purpose. That killed me. It still gives me post-traumatic stress disorder to talk about it. It was like being raped, she said. Okay, she's lying. This is a very, very big lie. She made money off this tape, millions of dollars. And you don't get to make money off a sex tape or anything like this unless you sign a release. The people attempted to make money, on your sex tape without your permission, they would go to prison, as well as having to pay back all of the money they received. Paris Hilton decided to make herself famous by releasing commercially a sex tape that she had made. She is lying to you. Oh, about that sex tape. It was reported that during it, her cell phone rang. When she was on the job, as they say, she answered the call. What could possibly have been more important to her at that time than what she was doing? Someone telling her about a party later that night, say, well, they could always leave a text message, right? Celebrities. Don't you just hate them? I know I do. Before we get into Theater Thursday, let's have a look at the chat. Ernst Junger was an accomplished entomologist, apparently, says Hikmah Warrior. GC Stahl says, Paris Hilton, the vapid poster child of the millionaire oppressed. Yako Ratpala says, so Paris is just another woman who starts talking about how she was a victim during her sexy youthful career as soon as she gets too old to have a sex symbol career. Yeah, how about that? Kim Kardashian got to be famous because of her sex tape with Ray J. Oh, no, I had nothing to do with this. You signed a release. And the deal was negotiated by your own mother. You signed a release, you made millions of dollars, and it made you famous. But these people lie about it, and they get away with it. William Hicks says, PTSD, rape sounds like a Dr. Christine Blasey Ford copycat. Yeah. I feel confident that the Paris Hilton sex tape is the last thing on anybody's mind right now. Says Steve. Gamian says, is there anyone anymore who doesn't have PTSD? That's a very good question. It's a very good question. If you have PTSD, this is obviously, if it's serious, it's a condition which is gravely affecting your ability to navigate life. Why are people boasting about this? Was that woman complaining about diet food? I see all sorts of food that I would never eat, for various reasons, never even consider eating or find stupid. But it wouldn't occur to me to be insulted by it, to get angry about it. What's that? I'm trying to think of this breads that were introduced a few years ago as being something free. And I noticed that almost overnight, every menu you'd see, we offer gluten-free. No one was talking about gluten. Nobody. Apparently it was a curse on the human race. And this was only recognized a few years ago. No, it's a marketing ploy, is all that it is. Jonathan Pulse. Okay. All right. Ariana Grande has gotten darker as Beyonce has gotten lighter, says Chogokin 666. Yes, actually, Ariana Grande is not, as she might have you believe, Hispanic. She's Italian, and a light-skinned Italian with red hair. But no, apparently that is not the look. One must get darker. So, I'm going to be talking about the movie today, our movie for Theater Thursday. It's a movie from 2 years ago, and it is called Parasite. And it is directed by Bong Joon-ho, who co-wrote the screenplay with Han Jin-won. It is, well, it's described as a comedy, a dark comedy. It is very dark. It doesn't start out all that dark, but it gets darker and darker and wilder. And there is an absolutely crazy reveal in Act 3, which, I mean, it just shocked me. I never considered anything like that. It's extraordinarily well done in the acting, in the photography. I watched the black and white version of it. There's two versions, black and white and color. If you get the Criterion Blu-ray set, then you get to see both of them. It's a story about ambition, this movie. It's also a story about, fakery. And I suppose it's a story more than anything else about class, but those who have money and power and those that don't. It's set in Seoul, the capital of South Korea. And it's about, well, two families who are at, well, I won't say at the opposite ends of the social scale, but pretty far apart. Our first family, who we're introduced to first, we'll call them the Kim family. We have the father and the mother and a son and daughter. They seem to be quite intelligent, rather industrious people, but they have been reduced to grievous circumstance, living in a so-called basement apartment, which is absolutely squalid, tormented by stink bugs, and then tormented by waves of pesticide entering their squalid domicile. Also by people urinating directly outside in full view. And what is their job? Folding pizza cartons. I did not know that was a job before, but perhaps it is in Korea. And they are on the verge of destitution. And the son in the Kim family, Kim Ki-woo, who was played by Choi Woo-shik, he has ambitions. He did not work out at university. Apparently, he didn't have the vigor, as he later explains it. It's not so much about the knowledge as the vigor to crush the exam. And I gather from this film that there is a problem with credentialism in South Korea, the overproduction of elites. There's a line, when you have 100 university graduates applying for a job as a security guard, that tells me that something has gone terribly wrong. We see credentialism apparently in the driving a car for other people business, and the chauffeur business as well. Credentialism for housekeepers. And I suppose one of the ironies here is that the second family, the Park family, is a very trusting family, and they believe in the connection of approvals by others. That you shouldn't worry about credentials. You should worry about whether other people recommend them, which leads to disaster for them. I suppose one of the morals of this movie, a very dark one, is don't trust anyone ever, because everyone is looking. I mean, it's almost like a David Mamet movie. Everyone is looking to cheat you. So a young son has kind of a mentor called Min, and it's explained to him that there's money to be made in tutoring, particularly tutoring wealthy families. And so all you need to do is to fake the credentials and say that you are a university student. And if you make a good impression, then you get the job. And so he goes to the Park family, and he is introduced to the mother, and he makes a very good impression indeed. And he is to teach English to the daughter of the family. And there is a son and daughter in this family, as there is in the Kim family. And a big difference between the Parks and the Kims is that, it's traditional in Oriental families for boy children to be more highly regarded than girl children. This does not seem to obtain among the Kims, but it very much obtains among the Parks. That the Park girl, who is, 16, 17 years old, something like that, she seems to be a very sensitive girl, a nice girl, but she is persuaded that her family doesn't care for her much, and they don't appear to care for her much. Whereas their son, who is clearly autistic and close to insane, they care about him a great deal. I was rather worried that we were going to get into we have to talk about Kevin territory. But we see that there's a plan, that the young son, he has a big, big plan. Eventually, his family is going to insinuate themselves fully into the life of the Park family for profit. That everyone is going to be put on the payroll. And they will get to spend all this time in this doubtless enormously expensive mansion, which was designed by a famed architect, which strikes me as being absolutely hideous. It is like a bunker. It is like a bunker. And it is not a very friendly place. It turns out that it's actually more like a bunker than one might think at first, because there are tunnels involved. And we find out that this is considered somewhat embarrassing now, that these tunnels were built into houses. So if there were an attack by the North Koreans, or there was an attempt by gangsters to get you, you could flee into this tunnel. So it is suggested to the daughter, to the Kim daughter, that she could get a job with the Parks as well. How could she get a job? She could be an art teacher to the disturbed young son of the Parks. Now, she's quite a good-looking young woman, and she's very industrious, and she's good with Photoshop and finding images. So she creates a resume for herself that she's not just an art teacher, but an expert in art therapy. Because the Park mother, who was described as an extremely naive woman, which she is, she's certainly a nice enough woman, but I'll get to the subject of niceness a little later. Well, her disturbed little boy is a genius, is he not? The word Basquiat, the name Basquiat comes up, which is very amusing. And she seizes control of the situation, much like her brother had. He forcefully impresses the park mother, taking command of the situation with the young woman that he is tutoring. And the mother is bowled over by this. And so that he is going to get as much money as the previous tutor did, actually even more. And they have to have an English name for him. So they call him Kevin, just as the sister later becomes Jessica. And Jessica insists that no adults be present in the room when she is giving the art therapy to the disturbed young park son. And a spy is insinuated, which is the housekeeper. And she just, as I say, makes an enormous impression on the mother. And afterwards, she's asked about it. And she said, I Googled art therapy and then just ad-libbed. And she talks about, the schizophrenic corner of a painting. And I guess she has read her audience, just like Kevin had read his audience when he says about the boy, after complimenting one of his primitive paintings, saying, it's so metaphorical. And then he said, something happened to him in the last year, didn't it? And the mother's reaction, as if, he can see into people's souls. And it's fairly obvious that something bad happened to this child. So now we have Kevin and Jessica insinuated into the Park household. And despite the fact that they're phonies, Jessica seems to have quite an impact on the young autistic boy. He'd been completely out of control previously, but under Jessica's tutelage, he seems to be quite tractable, perhaps because this is the first time in his life that an adult has treated him in this manner. You can't do whatever you want. You owe me some respect. You owe me some respect, and, this will be good for you. So it seemed to me. So the money is coming in, but not enough for them to move out, which becomes a problem. I should mention the introduction of this so-called scholar's stone, which is a large stone, which is supposedly brings great fortune. This is given to the Kim family, and we find out that it is both a blessing and a curse. Similarly, to the Park family, a ghost was seen in the house. Well, apparently this brings great fortune to the family, and again, it turns out to be both a blessing and a curse. So son and daughter have jobs, but what about mom and dad? And it's at this point that I thought I thought this movie to be rather, a caper film, all very jolly. And then it stops being jolly. And you see how far that the Kims are willing to go to bring their will to bear on other people. There's little or nothing that they won't stoop to. The Park father, he has a chauffeur to drive his Mercedes. And he seems to be quite happy enough with this young man. But it's decided that Dad Kim is going to get the job. And so a trap is laid in the Mercedes. Jessica's panties put under a seat, under the driver's seat. They're going to be discovered eventually, and they are discovered by Park Dad, who is horrified by this because of the prospect that his driver is having sex in his automobile. And he doesn't like that idea. And he also doesn't like the idea of the shame that would attach to him, his family, and his business. He's a very successful businessman. It's never explained to us what his business is. And so, yes, he mentions cocaine or meth in this context to his wife, who was practically hysterical by this point, because of the suggestion that his chauffeur is taking cocaine or meth, or is even worse, is perhaps drugging women and then having sex with them in the backseat of the car. He came to this. He's not a stupid man. His reasoning process was, women, if they have sex in a car or other places, they often leave things behind, like hairpins and such like, but a pair of panties is rather a hard thing to forget. So the chauffeur gets fired. And so Kevin and Jessica, of course, guess, there's a top quality chauffeur, the best of the best. And we can, arrange an interview, which requires the Kim dad, who had actually worked as a chauffeur. He's done many jobs in his life, to reacquaint himself with the latest model Mercedes and all of their electronic devices, which he manages to do by pretending to be interested in buying one. So does the interview, does well, he gets hired. And you see that the relationship that he has with the Park father, it's right on the edge, of being too familiar. But it seems that the Park dad, he likes this. He likes this. He likes the pushback. He doesn't want his chauffeur to be essentially an automaton. Of course, Kim dad is continually, taking risks. But there's still one more person who must be dealt with, which is Guk Moon-gwang, who is the housekeeper, who seems quite a formidable woman. Quite formidable indeed. And as it's pointed out, yes, she may look like a sheep, but inside she's a fox. Sometimes she acts like she owns the house. Right. Of all the people in that house, she's lived there the longest. She was housekeeper to the architect, Namgung, but then went to work for this family. When the architect moved out, he introduced this woman to Park's family, telling them, this is a great housekeeper. You should hire her. So she survived a change of ownership. She won't give up such a good job easily. To extract a woman like that, we need to prepare well. Right. We need a plan. It turns out she is seriously allergic to peaches. And so the Kims decide that they are going to poison her. Now, okay, anyone can be exposed to a foodstuff that they're allergic to. No, but they have an even more diabolical plan. They have intuited quite correctly that the Park mother has a horror of communicable disease. And so they managed to make it appear as if the housekeeper has active tuberculosis and is coughing, going into coughing fits and coughing up blood. And that's the end for her. And then mom, is part of an elite housekeeping organization, so elite that you have to you have to apply, you have to prove your worth, including even get a copy of the title to your home. Are you wealthy enough in order to deserve having one of our employees? And you can see that the Parks are they're mad about status, quite mad about it. One could say that there's a series of coincidences in this film. Could a family be that naive? Well, they're soft. They're quite soft. It's true that it seems that they were born into money, both the mother and the father, and they've never given much thought to their position in the world, that their position is always going to be near the top, that they deserve it. That is their class, their status on earth. And so they go out for a birthday trip for their son, camping. The boy is a Cub Scout, and he's become obsessed with the lore of what they used to call the Red Indians of North America. He dresses up as one. He has a teepee in the backyard. He shoots arrows around the house. And this is beautifully well done, that the Kims, all four of them, are luxuriating in the house of the Parks because, well, the cat's away, and it begins to rain. It begins to rain very, very heavily, and there is a thunderstorm which is going to have enormous consequences for everyone in the film. I mean, as I say, the way that this unfolds is really ingeniously, beautifully done. And so Nemesis is followed by Hubris. Hubris is followed by Nemesis, of course. And the Kims, marveling about how many different kinds of alcohol the Parks have in their house, have a little feast in the living room. I don't know, they've got about 12 different bottles of alcohol, and they proceed to get absolutely hammered. And they're very honest with each other, this family, in contrast to the Parks, who are much more straight-laced. And it's something of an orgy, not a sexual orgy, but things are broken and things are thrown around, and they get an unexpected visitor. And I'm not going to spoil the surprise for you, but it is an enormous surprise. There's this theme of bondage in the film, because we are introduced to a figure who is being kept in bondage. And of course, there's the obvious connection between class divisions and bondage. That if you were to look at the Kims and compare them to the Parks, why should one family be near the top and another family be near the bottom? Well, I suppose, life is unfair. And of course, who your parents were count for so very much. One could say that you could look at this film as the Kims being punished, for overreaching. The third act of the film is, well, it's grand guignol, actually. And the tension rises and rises and rises in a very well-ordered way, leading to horror and disaster. And disaster in a, how would I put it, in a rather unique way, in a unique setting, in a very artificial setting. There's a scene near the end of the film which quite reminded me of one in a particularly horrific scene in Todd Solondz's movie Happiness, which is it's so unexpected, and so grotesque. At the end of the film, there have been some changes. Things have gone back to their original state, at least for some. This is a very beautiful film. I'm physically beautiful. It is. And I'm so very much impressed by the camera work, by the long pans in which we are introduced to all of the various levels of this rather grotesque mansion. Also, the use of height to indicate status. I mean, traditionally, rich people have lived in the hills, and poor people have lived at ground level. But this is depicted visually very powerful in two bookending scenes. The scene when Kevin makes the long trek uphill to the Park house, and then in reverse, in a panicked retreat from the house. Apparently, there are a lot of stairs, a lot of steep stairs. I mean, some of the longest staircases outdoor staircases I've ever seen. And when this is accompanied by, well, nothing less than a monsoon, it is very powerful. It's very powerful indeed. You know, this movie won 4 Academy Awards. It won Best Picture. It was praised to the skies. And so I was rather shy about it because typically these films, which are, Oscar bait, are either nothing much or they're actively terrible. Well, this film is tremendous. It is absolutely tremendous. It makes one think about the conditions of the rich, in that obviously Park Dad, he has talent. He's a successful businessman. But in other aspects of life, well, you look at him and his wife, that they have no concept of domesticity. Domesticity must be laid on by others. That they can't do the simplest things, and they are doing a terrible job of raising their son and daughter, because apparently that's not their job either. They have become so distanced from reality as to, well, invite cruel treatment, as to invite the invasion that they suffer. I found this film extraordinary, and it has my highest recommendation. So those are my thoughts on Parasite. Rich people are usually tall, says Gamma Yun. Queen Elizabeth is an odd exception. I don't know. Is she rich? I mean, she's rich in the sense that the monarchy owns these things, but they're not hers to, the power to own power of ownership is power to destroy. She doesn't have that power. She's, custodian to hand it on to the next generation. What are we talking about? Elton John? Really? Elton John's still doing Vegas in August? I thought he was doing a tour. Oh, spicy garlic butter linguine with tossed salad, sourdough breadsticks, and fruit tart. That is what Don Wills is eating for dinner tonight. Popcasso 88 says Parasite was great, but the Oscar should have gone to Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which I liked. I liked it a lot. I'll say one thing about Parasite, that the director was personally involved in writing the captions for this film, which of course is almost entirely in Korean. It makes a big difference. It makes a big difference because you're translating from a foreign language, and the director, the screenwriter, might have some, idiomatic translation in mind. And with these subtitles, you're getting them straight from the director himself. Okay. So Parasite is better than 1917. Not that I care about the Oscars anymore, but I thought when they gave it to Parasite over 1917, it was for PC reasons. I don't think it's for PC reasons. You could say that if you wanted to, you could say that the Koreans in Parasite do not come off looking very well at all. They are not a noble, suffering minority, at least, not in this film. They are either, rich and feckless, or poor and scheming and, wicked. So no, I don't think it was for PC. Jonathan Paul says South Korea sounds like the U.S. Hundreds of PhDs applying for very poorly paid jobs. This has been the case since the 1970s. A Slavonic studies professor that I had at UBC, who later became a personal friend, He was hired as a sessional lecturer, which is pretty much the lowest of the low. And he was hired in 1976. He had a PhD, and he was hired as a sessional lecturer. Over 100 people applied for the job that he got. Higher IQ crowd dream house. Okay. So that is the show for today, for Thursday. I will be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern, and it's the book club. So Andy knows a book about Antifa. I'm going to be talking about. If you like the show or any part of it, I appreciate it if you click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not done so already. If you would like to make a donation to this live stream, exceedingly well appreciated at this juncture of great uncertainty in my life. My PayPal account is linked to Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. Once again, Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. If you are in Canada, then a donation to the live stream can be made directly via interact@kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and societal collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.